Hello, beautiful community. A few of you have asked me to make a comment about the election result in Slovakia. And I'll do that, I think, more from an emotional point of view. Because what happens in politics is there's a real risk to over-catastrophize political outcomes and not understand that there is always a chance to go again when there is a chance to go again. And unless you're in Belarus, there is a chance to go again. Now, Mr. Fico won the largest share of the vote, but it's a minority share of the vote, and complex coalition politics will follow. And the European Union and the West more widely will need to constructively engage with this situation. And it's true that it poses some risk in further undermining Western unity on backing Ukraine against Putin's brutal invasion. And of course, Mr. Orban said, look who's back. Now, it's very important that you've got to have insight and intuition to talk about internal country politics, which is more than just knowing a bunch of facts. And that's why I'm reluctant to say anything too deeply about the internal politics of countries that aren't one of the 5 or 6 countries that I have a feel for. And this is in itself an error that we've often seen with somebody like Mr. Chomsky, who studies countries from a kind of telescope, and all the facts there are right, but you actually need to not stare in the telescope but get more of a taste for what's going on. You're not going to learn about your neighbor by looking at them through the telescope. You'll learn more by more engaged kind of observation. So I want to make instead 4 points that I made a note of that are broader than anything to do with Slovakia, that help us both remain concerned but also not freak out in an informed and intelligent way. Now, number 1, the pattern is there. The pattern is there more rapidly in Eastern Europe and more slowly in Western Europe, but the pattern of democratic decline is there. It doesn't mean it can't be interrupted to some extent. It doesn't mean that the energy can't be taken out of forces that are drifting us in that direction. But that is a trend. And we've got to stop being shocked and re-shocked and shocked and re-shocked and shocked and re-shocked when things tilt in that direction. Much of our business is going to be, over the next few decades, making sure that our political institutions survive the anti-democratic challenges they will increasingly face from certain kinds of, if you like, anti-constitutional political forces. So, again, this is not constructively helped by, 77 episodes of Out of Panic, given that there are going to be these 77 episodes. We should see them as a single long line, which we try to engage with constructively. Second comment is specifically a pattern for the European Union. Now, when I was a child, when I was just going up to university as an undergraduate a quarter of a century ago, I loved witnessing the introduction of the euro. And I remember being, I think, in Florence and seeing, some place that wouldn't take the euro yet because they didn't like the look of it, but they were supposed to. And that transition felt good to anybody who has strong Europhilic dispositions, as I do. But even at that time, my feeling was this is a project that's going to begin unraveling in decades to come. And what we're going to see isn't something like the breakup of the European Union or the collapse of the European Union in the 2030s or 2040s, but we're going to see a drift that we can partly battle with, partly reverse, but a drift toward a situation where the EU's own rules and procedures increasingly cease to apply inside itself. So it's a drift in the direction of the European Union becoming less our sort of everyday clothes, if we're the EU member states, and increasingly as a kind of a gown that we wear in large part as a formality. That's the drift. It's the drift not toward a collapse, but toward an imperceptible unraveling of the European Union, where if things go badly enough, we'll reach a point where we say, is it there or is it not? Well, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. So a negative scenario for the EU, which is where the drift is taking us, is not a scenario of collapse, but a scenario increasingly of, if you like, the wheels moving, but no distance being covered. Now, Putin's theory about Western decline. Putin is a delusional tyrant who has been profoundly corrupted by the kind of power that he's held in his hands. I mean, this was a screwed up political figure right at the beginning, but that figure in 1999 is in many ways quite a different person to what we've got now. That figure in 1999 would be utterly shocked by himself today, as much as we might not like what he was in 1999. And it's part of this story of the delusional tyrant, this business of his theory of the decline of the West. So it ain't right. It's held as dogma rather than as an empirical observation. But it's nevertheless, it contains a very big grain of truth. In other words, the trend is where Putin is saying it is. It's going where he's saying it's going, but it's not an inexorable process toward the disappearance of a certain mode of politics, a certain mode of life, Western democracy, the modern democratic republic. There's nothing as inevitable, as rapid, or as inexorable there as what Putin thinks. So don't confuse, the analysis of Western decline by Professor Charles Taylor in Canada with the dogmatic ravings of that thing in the Kremlin. They're different things, but Putin has a point. The trend is moving in that direction, but not in anything like the teleological way Putin ascribes to it. 4. Just a brief point about the contingency of politics. And that is, of course, that on a specific issue of Ukraine, that doesn't make our world more pleasant, but on the specific issue of Ukraine, anti-democratic exclusionary politics, certain kinds of unconstructive populism, do not necessarily mean a lack of support for Ukraine. They tend to mean that, but they don't always. So, for example, the former British Prime Minister, sadly, there's a good chance he may be a future Prime Minister, the former British Prime Minister doesn't give a hoot about Ukraine, Boris Johnson, but exploited the issue for his political benefit, is an anti-democratic populist and demagogue, but his support for Ukraine was firm and consistent, happened to serve him that way. So even that's not an absolutely necessary connection in every case, and you've got to be aware of that. Not that it helps us, because we don't want anti-democratic politicians corroding our institutions. Again, back to where we started, the difference is that Britain has so many problems, of course. It's a country that's behind other Western European countries in so many respects, in terms of public services, in terms of quality of life, in terms of infrastructure, but its democratic institutions are comparatively very strong. So the problem is that destructive politics matched with weak institutions and very mixed history of a bit of democracy here, a lot of dictatorship there. That's a blend that's easier to topple. Enough for today. Basic takeaway: we do not panic about reversible political outcomes because we're looking at the long line. Lots of left toxin.